June 6, 1944, 1:30 a.m. Private Robert Murphy hung in his parachute harness, floating through absolute darkness toward Nazi-occupied France. He couldn't see the ground, couldn't see the other paratroopers who jumped with him, couldn't even see his own hands in front of his face. Above him, the C-47 transport that had carried him across the English Channel was already disappearing into the night. Around him, tracers streaked through the sky as German anti-aircraft guns opened fire on the massive aerial armada, over 13,000 American paratroopers dropping into Normandy in the largest airborne invasion in history. Murphy's mission was simple, at least on paper: land with your unit, assemble at the rally point, seize the bridges and causeways behind Utah Beach before dawn. But as his boots hit the ground in a flooded field somewhere in the Continental Peninsula, Murphy realized something terrifying. He had no idea where he was. He had no idea where his unit was. And he had no way to contact anyone. His radio, a bulky SCR-300 backpack unit, had been torn away when his parachute deployed. The spare radio in his leg bag was at the bottom of a swamp somewhere. Even if he had a working radio, the frequencies were jammed with German interference and overlapping Allied transmissions. Murphy crouched in the darkness, water up to his knees, listening. Footsteps, splashing, coming toward him. Friend or enemy? In the pitch black, there was no way to tell. American and German uniforms looked identical in darkness. Challenging someone verbally was suicide. Germans had learned English phrases specifically to infiltrate American positions. The footsteps got closer. Murphy's finger moved to his rifle trigger. This was the nightmare scenario the generals had feared. Thousands of paratroopers scattered across enemy territory with no way to identify each other. In the confusion, Americans would kill Americans. Units would never assemble. The entire airborne operation, critical to the success of the beach landings at dawn, would collapse into chaos. But then Murphy remembered something in his pocket. Something the supply sergeant had handed him just 12 hours earlier in England. Something he'd almost thrown away because it seemed so ridiculous. A toy cricket. A child's clicker made of brass, no bigger than a matchbox, worth about $2. Murphy pulled it from his pocket and squeezed it once. Click-clack. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, from the darkness, click-clack, click-clack. To understand why a toy cricket became so critical, you need to understand just how badly the D-Day parachute drop went wrong. The plan was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. The U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions would jump behind Utah Beach in the early hours of June 6th. Their objectives: secure the causeways crossing the flooded fields behind the beach, capture key bridges over the Douve and Murderat rivers, destroy German artillery positions, block enemy reinforcements from reaching the beaches. If they succeeded, the 4th Infantry Division landing on Utah Beach at dawn would have a clear path inland. If they failed, thousands of soldiers would be slaughtered on the beaches. The drop zones were carefully planned. Each regiment had specific landing areas. Each company knew exactly where to assemble. Every soldier carried maps, compasses, and detailed orders. On paper, it was flawless. But paper doesn't account for reality. The flight across the English Channel started well enough. Over 800 C-47 transport planes flying in tight formation, carrying the destiny of the invasion in their bellies. But as the planes approached the French coast, everything went wrong. German anti-aircraft fire was heavier than expected. Thick clouds obscured visibility. Pilots broke formation to evade flak, climbing and diving, banking hard. Inside the planes,
Paratroopers were thrown against the walls. Equipment broke loose. Men vomited from the violent maneuvers. Then came the drop. In the chaos, planes dropped their paratroopers wherever they happened to be, sometimes miles from their intended drop zones. Some planes flew too fast, scattering men across huge distances. Others flew too low, giving parachutes barely enough time to open. Pathfinders, the elite troops who were supposed to mark drop zones with lights, had themselves been scattered. The lights that did get set up were often in the wrong locations. The result was catastrophic: confusion. Private Murphy, who was supposed to land with 150 men from his company, landed alone in a swamp. Lieutenant Richard Winters, who would later become famous, landed 2 miles from his drop zone and spent an hour finding just 2 other men from his company. Entire platoons landed in flooded fields and drowned, weighed down by 100 pounds of equipment. Others landed directly on top of German positions and were killed before they could even get out of their harnesses. By 2 a.m., roughly 1 hour after the jump, the situation was desperate. Only 1,100 of the 6,600 men from the 101st Airborne had assembled at their rally points. Entire companies were missing. Commanders had no idea where their men were. Communication was impossible. General Maxwell Taylor, commander of the 101st Airborne, found himself alone in a field with just 3 other soldiers, none from his own staff. It was the largest airborne operation in history, and it was falling apart.
You might wonder, why didn't they just use radios? The answer is complicated, and it reveals just how fragile military technology was in 1944. The primary radio for paratroopers was the SCR-300, a 38-pound backpack unit with a range of about 3 miles in ideal conditions. But D-Day was anything but ideal. First problem: the radios were fragile. The violent parachute opening often snapped antennas or damaged internal components. Many soldiers had their radios torn completely off during the jump. Second problem: even working radios were nearly useless in the chaos. Frequencies were jammed with overlapping transmissions. Everyone was trying to report their position at once, creating an incomprehensible wall of noise. Third problem: German jamming. The Wehrmacht had radio detection equipment and was actively interfering with Allied frequencies. Fourth problem: the flooded fields. Water shorted out equipment. Radios that survived the jump often died the moment soldiers waded through swamps. Fifth problem: training. In the darkness and confusion, many soldiers couldn't remember their radio call signs or frequencies. But the biggest problem was simpler and more fundamental. Radios don't work if you don't know who you're talking to. In the darkness, soldiers couldn't see more than a few feet. They could hear footsteps, voices, movement, but they couldn't identify if those sounds were American or German. The Germans knew this. They'd specifically trained infiltrators to use American equipment, speak English, and create confusion. So even if your radio worked, even if you made contact with someone nearby, you couldn't trust the voice on the other end. What the paratroopers needed wasn't better radios. They needed a way to instantly identify friend from foe in absolute darkness, something that didn't require seeing, didn't require talking, and couldn't be faked by the enemy. They needed a signal that was silent enough not to alert distant Germans, loud enough to hear at close range, impossible to replicate without the specific device, simple enough to use under extreme stress. No radio could do that, but a cricket could.
The cricket clicker wasn't some brilliant invention by military scientists. It was literally a children's toy, mass-produced by the Acme Whistle Company in England. The full name was Acme Clicker Model 470, a simple brass device that made a distinctive click-clack sound when squeezed. Kids used them as toys. Referees used them in soccer games. They cost about $2 each, and somehow they ended up in the pockets of paratroopers heading to D-Day. The idea came from several officers in the 101st Airborne who'd been wrestling with the identification problem during training exercises in England. Password challenges weren't working. In the stress of combat, soldiers forgot passwords or pronounced them wrong. Americans with accents sounded foreign. Nervous soldiers shot first and asked questions later. Someone, accounts differ on exactly who, suggested using a simple sound signal, not a voice, but a mechanical noise that couldn't be faked without the specific device. They tested various options. Whistles, too loud, would alert Germans. Bells, too musical, too distinctive. Hand claps could be easily imitated. Then they found the cricket. 1 click for challenge, 2 clicks for response. It was genius in its simplicity. The cricket made a very specific sound, a sharp, metallic click-clack that was distinctive, couldn't be confused with battlefield noises. Quiet, only audible within 50 to 100 feet. Impossible to imitate. The human voice couldn't replicate the precise metallic click. Foolproof. Even in extreme stress, anyone could remember 1 click, 2 clicks. But when supply officers started handing out crickets to paratroopers in the hours before the D-Day jump, reactions were mixed. Some soldiers thought it was a joke, a toy for the biggest invasion in history. Others tossed them aside, focused on real equipment like ammunition and grenades. Many didn't even understand what they were for. The briefings had been rushed, and in the chaos of final preparations, the cricket's purpose wasn't always explained clearly. Private Don Burgett of the 101st Airborne recalled, "I remember thinking, what the hell am I supposed to do with a kid's toy? I almost left it on the plane." But most soldiers shoved the cricket in their pockets, figuring it couldn't hurt. It weighed nothing, took up no space. Some commanders took it more seriously. They drilled their men, 1 click, 2 clicks, 1 click, 2 clicks, over and over. Others were skeptical. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Wolverton told his men, "Use your judgment. If you need it, you'll figure it out." No one knew if it would actually work in combat. No one knew if soldiers would remember to use it in the chaos. No one knew if the sound would carry far enough or if it would be drowned out by gunfire and explosions. It was an experiment, a desperate gamble. And in just a few hours, thousands of lives would depend on whether that gamble paid off. When the scattered paratroopers hit the ground in Normandy, the cricket instantly proved its worth. Private Murphy's encounter in the swamp was just one of hundreds that night. All across the Cotentin Peninsula, in fields and hedgerows and flooded ditches, the same scene played out again and again. A soldier, alone in the darkness, hears footsteps. He pulls out the cricket. Click-clack. He waits, heart pounding. Click-clack, click-clack. Friend. The relief was overwhelming. In those few seconds, soldiers went from preparing to kill or be killed to finding an ally in enemy territory. The crickets allowed scattered paratroopers to find each other without speaking, without showing lights, without revealing their positions to Germans. Lieutenant Richard Winters used his cricket to assemble men from different companies into an ad hoc fighting unit. By dawn, he'd gathered 15 soldiers, none from his original platoon, purely by moving through the darkness and clicking. Captain Charles Shettle found 45 men using the cricket system. They formed up and successfully attacked a German position guarding a causeway, one of the critical D-Day objectives. The cricket was especially vital in the hedgerow country, the bocage, where visibility was measured in feet, not yards. The thick vegetation and stone walls created a maze where soldiers literally couldn't see each other until they were within arm's reach. In that terrain, the cricket was the only way to avoid friendly fire. Private First Class William Galbraith recalled, "I clicked at least 50 times that night, every time I expected to get shot. Every time I heard 2 clicks back, and I wanted to cry with relief." But the cricket wasn't foolproof. Some soldiers forgot they had it in the chaos. Others were too scared to use it, afraid the sound would give away their position. And a few Germans actually figured out the system. There are documented cases of German soldiers who found crickets on dead Americans and tried to use them to infiltrate US positions. But they didn't understand the one-click, two-click protocol, or they clicked at the wrong moment, and alert Americans caught them. The cricket also had an unexpected psychological benefit. It was calming. In the terrifying chaos of the night drop, surrounded by invisible enemies, hearing that simple click-clack sound was reassuring. It meant you weren't alone. Someone else was out there. Americans were finding each other. Staff Sergeant Harrison Summers later said, "That cricket sound, I can still hear it. In all the noise and fear, it was the only thing that made sense." By dawn on June 6th, the scattered paratroopers had done something remarkable. Despite being dropped miles from their objectives, despite losing most of their equipment, despite having no radio contact with commanders, they dissembled into effective fighting units. Not in the organized, by-the-book way the planners had envisioned, but in small groups, ad hoc teams, collection of survivors who found each other in the darkness using a child's toy. These improvised units captured bridges, blocked roads, attacked German positions, and created enough chaos and confusion that the German defenders couldn't mount an effective response to the beach landings. The 4th Infantry Division came ashore at Utah Beach at 6:30 a.m., expecting heavy resistance. Instead, they found the causeways secured, the German artillery silenced, and paratroopers, exhausted, scattered, but still fighting, who'd cleared the way inland. Utah Beach had the lowest casualties of any D-Day landing site, and a significant part of that success came from a $2 cricket that let Americans find each other in the dark. The cricket's success on D-Day didn't go unnoticed by military planners. In the weeks and months after the invasion, reports flooded in from commanders praising this simple device. General Maxwell Taylor personally wrote a commendation highlighting how the cricket had saved the airborne operation from total chaos. The U.S. military ordered tens of thousands more crickets. They became standard issue for airborne units throughout the rest of World War II. During Operation Market Garden in September 1944, the massive airborne assault in the Netherlands, crickets were again used for identification. The operation was ultimately a failure, but the cricket system worked flawlessly. In the Pacific Theater, U.S. Marines and Army units began experimenting with similar sound-based identification systems, though the cricket itself was too associated with European operations. After the war, the cricket became a legend. Veterans would sometimes click them at reunions, and the sound would instantly transport them back to that night in Normandy. The Acme Whistle Company, which had no idea its toy would play such a critical role in history, continued manufacturing crickets. Today, original D-Day crickets are prized collectibles, selling for hundreds of dollars. But here's what's remarkable. Despite its importance, the cricket remains relatively unknown. Ask most people about D-Day, and they'll mention the beach landings, the Rangers at Point du Hoc, the carnage at Omaha Beach. Very few know about the toy that saved hundreds of lives behind the lines. Why? Partly because it's not dramatic. There's no footage of crickets being used, no photographs of the moment. It happened in darkness, in scattered locations, witnessed by small groups. Partly because it seems absurd. Military history tends to focus on weapons, vehicles, strategy, not children's toys. And partly because the soldiers themselves often downplayed it. When they told stories of D-Day, they talked about combat, about buddies who died, about fear and courage. The cricket was just there, a small detail in a much larger story. But make no mistake, the cricket changed everything that night. Without it, the scattered paratroopers would have been even more isolated, more likely to shoot each other, less able to form fighting units. The chaos would have been worse, the casualties higher, the mission objectives less likely to be achieved, and the men landing on Utah Beach might have faced a very different reception.